In this lesson, we'll have a closer look into our end particle properties. We'll also learn how to correct our space scale for setting up the correct units when running particle simulations, and we'll learn how to work with collisions. Getting started, let's say we go ahead and start back on frame 1 and we'll hit play. Right now our particles kind of look like fairy dust, right? Some type of magic. Let's go ahead and fix that so that they start to resemble steam. We can go ahead and select our particle object, either from the viewport here or from our outliner. And now let's say we go ahead and move up to our particle size parameter, and we'll work with a larger radius per particle. Let's go ahead and set this to about 70. Fantastic. So now this is starting to look more like steam, right? It's much cloudier. Fantastic. Now, this does not solve the issue of our particles flying upward. Let's go ahead and start to have them get pulled down to our floor. Now, how do we do that? Well, we can do this from the same particle object. If we were to scroll down, we'll find our dynamic properties drop down. Let's go ahead and expand that. From there, we can go to our local force, go to the y-axis, and set this to -1. Nice. So this should start to pull our particles down. But you might notice that it doesn't happen just yet. Now, why is that? That has to deal with our space scale, something that's regulated by the nucleus node. Let's go ahead and move over to our nucleus node, and we'll scroll down until we find our scale attributes. Right now, our space scale is set to 1. Keep in mind that this considers meters by default. But if we were to go to our preferences in Maya, go up to settings, you'll notice that Maya's working units is actually centimeters. So all we need to do is go ahead and adjust our space scale to consider centimeters instead of meters. So it's as simple as typing in 0.01. We'll hit enter, and now take a look at what happens when we hit play. Now our particles are starting to get pulled down. How exciting is that? This is starting to look really epic now. If we were to do a quick render, let's go ahead and do that. You'll notice that our steam is coming along quite well. Of course, there are a few more properties to modify. We can see that this is looking much better than it did before. Fantastic. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So the next thing we're going to work on is setting up a collider to make sure that these particles will interact with our floor. So let's say we do this. We'll go ahead and press Control A just to move back to our channel box. From there, we will turn off reference mode on our set layer so we can go ahead and grab the floor. Fantastic. So once we've done that, it's now time to move up to our EnMesh menu, and here is where we would create a passive object or a collision object. Let's go ahead and choose Create Passive Collider. Fantastic. Now we'll go ahead and start back from frame 1 and we'll hit play. Sweet. So you can see now our particles are starting to collide with this object. However, there's a large gap here that we need to correct. Where's that gap coming from? Well, let me go ahead and show you something. If we were to go ahead and grab the rigid object, there it is. And then if we were to head over to our attribute editor, we'll just go ahead and press Control A. You'll notice that we can access our collision properties from here underneath the EnRigid shape node. Sweet. Watch this. Since we have this set to collide, you'll notice that when we go to our solver display, we can actually view the collision thickness. So this is going to show us what Maya is using to figure out how our particles should collide with our surface. And then we can start to adjust that thickness. We can bring this down so that the particles can get closer to our collision object. So you might set this to something pretty low, maybe about 0.3, to get the particles to move much closer. All right, let's go ahead and see what happens now when we hit play. So you can see now they are starting to get much closer to our floor. That looks really nice. Fantastic stuff. Another thing you might consider adjusting, just to make sure that the particles don't get stuck. Remember, this is steam, right? So you can go ahead and set your friction to 0. Fantastic. We could do the same thing for the particle object. We'll just go ahead and select it, go to collisions, and let's go to make sure our friction is set to 0 so that there's no influence, save for, of course, the particles flowing across this floor. Then if you wanted to, you can also adjust your collision thickness. You can go ahead and enable that to have an idea of how your particles collide with the rigid object. And you could start to adjust your scale. If you find that your particles are kind of flying all over the place, you might go ahead and bring the scale in just a bit more. These are kind of like proxies for our particles. Super exciting stuff. Fantastic. All right, sweet. So once we're done with these settings here, we can then go ahead and turn off the solver display. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing for the rigid surface. Let's go ahead and set that to off. Fantastic. So now when we go ahead and play this through, we should notice something that looks more like steam. And take a look at how it starts to flow along our floor. How exciting is that? Super cool stuff. All right, so once we've managed to get the settings that we need to make sure that the particles collide with our floor, this is a good stopping point. In the next lesson, we'll finish setting up the behaviors we would like to see from our particle objects. And then following that, I'll go ahead and show you how to shade them so that they look more realistic.